Hey everyone, my name is Steven. I'm Protocol Cosplay, and today we're going to take a deep dive into the Shadow RC version 2 board. I'm going to give you as much information as I can about the board, how to use it, what you want to do with it, and yeah, we'll just go through the entire board and see what it's all about. So let's get going.
Wait! Wait! Oh my! What have you done?
Okay, so this is an example of one of the boards that I'll be walking you through. We've got a lot to do. Well, not a lot to do actually, but we do have a couple of things to do to get this set up. And so I'm going to bring you over toward here, and I'm going to get a close-up shot so I can show you what to do with a board like this if and when you get one. So let's get going. Okay, so this is the Shadow RC V2 board that you might get. Now, the newer boards might be a little bit different because I'm working with a PCB manufacturer to get some of these things to be surface mounted. But in essence, everything will work the same way, whether it's a surface mounted component or in this case, a full through hole component. So as you look at this board, this is what you will in essence get. There is a Teensy 4.1 here. This is the audio board from Teensy, and that is sitting on sockets on the Teensy. Right here and here is where you'll plug in your receivers. Here is where you'll plug in usually your motor controllers and things like that. Over here is some expansion slots, but this is also where you probably will plug in your ESCs if you're using those, and grounds to the ESCs. Down here, we actually have some connections for a future upgrade for XB. I plan to make some XB controllers and receivers for this for a lot of different reasons, but XB is also just a really nice way to work with controllers and communications wirelessly. So this will eventually be where you plug in the power for the XB receiver, but also where you plug in the receiver itself so that it can communicate with the Teensy. You also have these two buttons here, which work as a menu system on Shadow RC. And then up here, you've got main power. Okay, so this is main power, and you can see positive and negative there. One thing to note about this is that the audio board does come off, but it's the only thing that comes off. So the audio board is set up to sit right on top of the Teensy. And all you got to do when you're trying to make sure that it's lining up correctly is point the little 3.5 millimeter jack upward, and then line it up right pin for pin, right at the edge. So if you look down here, you'll actually see that the pins here are 5-volt ground and 3-volt on this side. So you see 5-volt ground, 3-volt, then there's ground 0, 1, 2, 3, and all that. That corresponds right here. It's kind of covered right here, but you can see 5-volt, 3-volt, or sorry, 5-volt ground, 3-volt, and onward. So it really just sticks 1-to-1. So all you got to do is make sure that it's 1-to-1, sticking with the 3.5 or the headphone jack upward, and then you just push it down, and that's it. So that is how you would connect the audio board if you needed to take it off. There's really no need to take it off. Everything is accessible with it on, but that's where you would do if you needed to take it off. And then you also would plug in your SD card into this slot, not this slot, because as you can see, this slot is pretty much blocked off. You're not going to be able to get an SD card inside there. So you plug in your SD card here, and then it'll be good to go. So then when you're plugging in your receivers, that's the next thing that you want to do. You can see that it says RECA, and there's a little bit of Oh, that's just a little fuzzy thing. Okay, so you see RECA and RECB right there. So that's the A controller, and this is the B controller. And then you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's the amount of channels that you get on your receiver. So you'll just plug them in one to one. Now, why did I go with this setup? Well, I was originally going to use terminal blocks, kind of like this, where you would plug in your signal lines in terminal blocks that existed here and here. But I found that the RC signals weren't stable enough unless they were accompanied by a ground pin. And what that meant was I could either put 24 terminal blocks across here, one for signal, one for ground, one for signal, one for ground, etc. And that would fix the problem, but there was really no space to put 24, blocks all the way through here. And you would have to unscrew and rescrew and unscrew and rescrew. So what I decided to do is basically a standard servo setup where you have a 3-pin connection and then the amount of connections that you need, in this case, 6. And what this means is that you can plug in an RC cable like this if you want to get it pre-done like these are. These are basically pre-done RC or 3-pin DuPont connections. And the only thing that you really need to remember is that the ground pin is the one farthest away from the teensy, and the signal pin is the one that's closest to the teensy. So if you're looking at like this, and this is top, middle, and bottom, then this top pin is the signal, this middle pin is unused, and this bottom pin is the ground. And it just makes it all nice and stable. Now, I will explain what these little holes are on the sides here in just a second. But for now, just remember that the signal line is the one closest to the teensy, and the ground line is the one farthest away. So then, when you get your signal line, you'll have 3 pins. However, the middle pin on the receivers that you get for the transmitters is power, and it actually can deliver power. And we don't want that. So we don't want 5 volts going to the board. Now, these pins are in the middle aren't connected to anything, but that doesn't mean that voltage can't go through them and cause problems. We don't want excess voltage going into any place that it shouldn't be. So what we're going to do when we take a wire here is we're actually going to snip this wire. Now, you could remove the wire entirely out of the DuPont connection. You just kind of lift this little tab up and remove the DuPont connection. But I actually like to keep the pin inside here. If you're using if you're making these wires yourself, you can choose whether you keep the wire in there. These are pre-made ones, so that I just got off Amazon. So they're already made with 3 wires. But I like to have the middle pin inside there because it'll hold on to the pin here, and it won't just be a bare, connection. So what we're going to do is we're going to snip the ends of that middle wire so that no 5-volt voltage can come from the receiver to the board and cause issues. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my wire snippers here, or my flush cutters here, and I'm going to cut it right on the edge here, right? So I'm going to cut it there, and that way that pin inside there is still going to have holding force, and it's going to make it so that you can still hold on to it. And just to be absolutely certain, I'm going to cut it a little length upwards. Okay. So there's no possibility of any kind of voltage going between that space, but I still get the holding power of the pin. And then I'm going to do it on the other side. I'm just going to get in here. Let's see. Snip that. Okay. And then I'm going to, let's get it right. snip that. Okay. So now, effectively, what I have is a 2-pin connection with 3 pins of holding force, which is great. And I do that on each side so that my wire looks like that. And that means that no excess voltage is going to go through the wires into the board, even though the pins on the board aren't connected. It's just a safety precaution to make sure that nothing bad happens. So now, when you've got that, let's say the ground line is my black wire and the signal line is my blue wire. All I'll have to do is plug that in like so to one of the connections, just like that. And then you do 6 more like that, connecting it, making sure that the ground is the farthest one away and the signal is the one closest to the teensy. And then I know a lot of people don't really like DuPont connections because they can come out pretty easily. Obviously, you can just pull it like that, and that can be a problem. Some people just don't like how wiggly these things can be. So I actually thought of that. What you can do now that you've cut out the middle wire, what you can do is you can actually run a zip tie through these 2 holes, and zip tie it down to the connection, and basically just feed a decent sized zip tie through this hole around and about and come back up through the other one and then zip tie it. This will hold the DuPont connections in place um, a lot better. Now, they hold pretty well already, and especially with 6 in there, they do hold pretty well. But if you're really worried about it and you want to have that little extra holding force, run a zip tie through these 2 holes and through the middle of these wires, which you've already cut out, and you'll have a good amount of holding force. And you'll just have that extra security of knowing that they're never going to come out as long as you have the zip tie there. So that's the connection of the receivers. You connect those just like that. Now, over here, this is where you're going to mostly plug in your hardware, like your motor controllers, potentially even a Maestro board or something like that. You'll see that there is a ground pin, then a TX7, TX4, RX4, and then another ground pin. The reason I named them TX4 and TX7 and RX4 is because there's going to be multiple versions of the software on this board. And depending on what your hardware is, that's going to determine what you are using as hardware, but also what you plug into on this board. So, for instance, you might be using the Sabertooth and Siren base combo, right? Where you're that's the most basic version. In which case you would plug into TX4 and a ground line, and that's it. You just need to use TX4 and ground, and you'll start working with that. But let's say you're using a different kind of a motor controller for your dome. Well, then you would need to use TX7 and TX4 because TX is what sends out commands. RX is what reads commands off of a serial device. So I'm planning on using the RoboClaw Solo 30, in which case I would hook up my TX or my Sabertooth to the TX7, and then the RoboClaw to the TX4 and the RX4, and I'd be good to go. But let's say you're also potentially going to use the hub motors for the Mark IV. Well, the hub motors are actually controlled by these 2 pins here, and it's kind of hard to read it, but you can kind of see it says ESC, L, and R down there. SS stands for software serial. Sometimes you might need to use the Maestro board if you have Maestro boards in a software serial. And really, what software serial means is that it's not hardware serial. These are hardware serial. TX7 and TX4 are what's called hardware serials. They're just a more reliable and they can handle a lot more data than a software serial. But Maestro boards don't really need a lot of serial communication. So a software serial is there just in case. But if you can see this, the ESC L and R, this is where you would plug in your left and right ESCs on this expansion option board. Um, and the reason that we do that is because the ESCs run off of PWM signals. They're not a serial communication like this. They can be, but it's not really useful to do because, the motors, you don't really need to have a serial communication to these things. So you basically plug in your ESC left signal and right signal, and then you also connect a ground line to both of those signals. And that ends up going to a 3-pin connection like this, except you'll do something similar here, where you don't have that middle pin, which provides power. The ESC can provide power back to the receiver, which this basically is the receiver at that point. So you'll basically do this, where you plug in your signal line and your ground line to the ESC, and you plug that signal line left and signal line right here, and then a ground here and a ground there. And you have ESC support. So that is the reason why I've named these things not like motor signal or, dome motor or something like that. It's because there's going to be variations in the software as to where you plug in each one. And I'll have a table available for people to figure out if you're using this kind of hardware with this board, what do I plug in my signal lines to in order for that to work? And then you've got button A and button B. I'll go into how these work on a little bit on another video, but button A and button B are basically a menu system. And what you'll be able to do is there's a couple of different things that you can change within the menu. First, you can mode switch, just like you would normally mode switch with Shadow RC. You can mode switch into hybrid mode or automated mode or manual mode or carpet mode just by selecting these buttons. Let's say your controllers ran out of battery, but you really want to switch into a kind of mode. You can do that here. You basically just press button A to cycle through menu options. It'll have an audio cue to say what menu option you're on, like mode selection or whatever. Then you hit button B to select. Then you start hitting button A again, and you go into the sub menu like manual mode, hybrid mode, automated mode, and carpet mode. And then you select which one you want with button B. But there's also behavioral settings. This system has an automated mode with hybrid mode and automation mode. And there is a behavioral setting change. So if you want him to be more active, you can make that. You can set him to high activity mode. Or if you want him to be less active, you can set him to low activity mode. Or you can set it to default, which is just what is baseline coded in. There's also speed settings. So you can go into the speed settings and you can select a fast speed, a slow speed, or a default speed for driving him around. So if he's going a little slow during that time, just go into the menu, select fast speed, and boom, you're in fast speed. And these will save regardless of how many times you power cycle. So the behavioral settings and speed settings will save so that when you turn them back on again, you're not going to have to go back and set the setting again. It'll just be fast or it'll just be high activity until you change it back to defaults. And then there's also Maestro settings. So if you have a Maestro board on here, you can tell the system how many Maestro boards you have. If you have one Maestro board in the dome, you can say dome only on the Maestro settings. If you have one Maestro board in the body, you can set it to body only. If you have two Maestro boards that are daisy chained together along a serial line, you can say dual Maestro boards. I haven't set it more than two Maestro boards, but if it gets to the point where we're seeing a lot of people use 3 or more Maestro boards, we can set that in code as well. But basically, you can set how many Maestro boards you have, or you can set it to none. But telling the system how many Maestro boards you have lets it know where to send the commands so that it doesn't, get confused as to sending a command to a Maestro board that doesn't exist. And that's pretty much it. Once you plug in your headphone jack, your auxiliary cable to your amp, you're good to go. That is Shadow RC V2. Once everything is plugged in and you're good to go, it'll start working right off the bat. So I hope you enjoyed this little breakdown of this board. The some boards may look a little newer or a little different, I should say, because these pieces from the PCB manufacturer, especially these capacitors and whatnot, and these level shifters, these take on a different look when working with a PCB manufacturer because they prefer to use surface mounted components. But um, it's pretty much the exact same thing. Um, Regardless of the board you get, whether it's surface mounted or this kind of through hole mounted, this is the board that you will get. And this is how it works. So I really hope you enjoyed this. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. We are going to probably start another run of these boards using the PCB manufacturer thing once that's all confirmed to go well. We'll start another run of these soon. But yeah, this is basically the entire board. And if you have any questions on how to work with the board in some way, feel free to reach out to me. Also, there will be some pretty good documentation as to how this board works that you will receive when you receive your board. But I just wanted to go over this in video form so you can kind of get an understanding of how this board works, what you'll have to do when you get the board, and honestly, how much easier it'll make your life. So, hope you enjoyed. Thanks, everyone.